Good morning, everybody, and warmly welcome to the fifth and final day of Stop Hatred Now 2026. My name is Sonja Lindfors. My pronouns are she and her. I am a choreographer and the artistic director of Urbanapa, as well as Stop Hatred Now, and I have been your host for this week. So what is Stop Hatred Now? Stop Hatred Now is an anti-racist and intersectional feminist platform whose purpose is to create new multi-voiced feminist discourse around anti-racism, inclusivity, and diversity within art and culture. It comes with a straightforward proposal that strives to stop hatred, oppression, and inequality and work towards inclusion, equity, diversity, and togetherness. The platform is initiated by Urbanapa but produced in collaboration with 13 other arts and cultural organizations, and this is a long list. Gatalusti, Culture for All Service, Globe Art Point, Goethe Institute Finland, KIOP, Gila ry, Miklagård Arts, Nordic Culture Point, the Finnish Art and Culture Agency, the Ministry of Education and Culture, UniArts Helsinki, Titanic, and Zodiac Center for New Dance. So even though you cannot see us all, we are actually many. Stop Hatred Now is supported by a multitude of organizations. We are thankful for your support. And if there's anybody from any institutions that would like to keep supporting us or like to start supporting us, please reach out. So friends, this year Stop Hatred Now turns 11 years old. For more than a decade, this platform has brought together artists, institutions, educators, policymakers, activists, and cultural workers to discuss, share tools, and work towards anti-racism, equity, and structural change within arts and culture. As we all know, there's still loads of work to be done. This year's theme is accountability and care. We're living through a time of polycrisis, and in recent years, the list of urgencies has only continued to grow. From the climate emergency to the spread of racist, conservative, and nationalist politics, and the rise in anti-trans violence to austerity politics and multiple ongoing wars, including in Iran, Ukraine, and the continuous genocide in Palestine. Many are exhausted and at loss for hope. So to all of you who are struggling, artists, activists, communities, we hear you, we see you. Your frustration, exhaustion are valid. And we're doing our best to keep pushing towards collective change. That is why we must continue gathering, listening, learning how to work together, defending equity, diversity, inclusivity, and human rights. We defend the right to dream, to experience joy and pleasure, softness and community, to make, to question, to fail, and to grow. We defend the right to exist in difference across needs, histories, perspectives, and desires. Accountability and care. Who are we accountable to? Who do we care for? How do we continue working together during times of exhaustion, conflict, and uncertainty? And how do we build spaces where care is not only discussed, but practiced? Accountability is not about written strategies or speeches like this. It is about action, responsibility, and consequence. The decisions being made right now in different institutions will shape what kind of artistic futures become possible and for whom. Care requires commitment, reflection, and action. Sometimes care means support and softness. Sometimes it means difficult conversations, repair, and transformation. This year's program brings forth a multitude of different voices, a multitude that often remains invisible within the Finnish art and culture field. Artists, activists, culture workers, scholars, and academics from different backgrounds and practices, languages, and knowledges. We hope that you will leave this week with concrete tools that will lead to concrete actions, but also with more questions, because it is good to stay with the question and stay with the trouble. And as we always remind, we cannot do everything, but we can always do something. So before we go on with the schedule, let's go through some housekeeping notes. So this is our 7th webinar, and we'll try our very best to make it a great experience for everybody. In case there are technical difficulties, your comprehension and patience are appreciated. As an attendee, your participation is a bit limited. You can participate by sending in questions via the Q&A option, and via the chat, you can keep the conversation going on with our behind-the-scenes team, in this case, Lisa Kalkowski and Tuukka Ervasti, when necessary. Again, a reminder, we are a small team of 3 here in the studio, so unfortunately, we might not be able to answer all your questions or comments right away. So once more, we are asking for your patience. There is closed caption by AI available, but you have to enable it from your tool panel yourself. And if you are watching this via the stream, for example, from YouTube, you will not be able to send in questions nor access the chat. So in case you want to chat with us, please come to the webinar. And please note that this session will be recorded. One more thing, if you like the program, please show it, or if you like the platform, please show it. Please share the program, tell your friends and colleagues about the platform, repost our material, or continue the conversation in your own communities and organizations. We need all the support we can get. So then let's go through our schedule for today. We will begin with a pre-recorded keynote by Samira Ibn Al-Qaid titled Intersectional Futures, Why We Need Accountability and Care. And after this, we will continue with today's panel discussion, CRIP Futures, Rethinking Time, Work and Care, with Char Heather, Jennifer Broe, and Christine Buland, moderated by A. Alatvin. And then we will shortly wrap up with Monica Gattuo and Keme Pellicer, who are the co-curators of Stop Hatred Now 2026. And then that will be the end of this year's webinar program, but not the end of the day, because at 12:30 we'll continue with an online workshop titled Dreaming of Impossible Futures, Collective Dreaming Practices, facilitated by myself, but unfortunately this workshop is already full. Then, last but not least, let's bear in mind that this is an anti-racist and intersectional feminist platform. We strive to enable multi-voice feminist discourse, and this means that we do not aim at consensus. We come from different languages, backgrounds, knowledges, and struggles, and we're often lost in translation. We do not have to agree. There must be space for new viewpoints and experiences, but the atmosphere must also remain respectful and inclusive. So friends, now we will read out loud the Safer Space guidelines, hoping that we can also normalize these simple procedures that can make spaces and places a little bit more accessible. So in order to keep the working environment as safe as possible, we need each other's help. Let's not assume consent, let's ask for it. Let's respect the physical, mental, and emotional boundaries of others as well as our own. Let's not assume the identity, sexuality, gender, health, and background of others. Let's respect the opinions, beliefs, and experiences of others, even when they differ from ours. Let's be aware of our prejudice, privilege, behavior in the space we occupy. Let's strive to act with positive intent and take care of each other. No harassment or discrimination whatsoever, no homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, ableism, fatphobia, etc. No discrimination based on locality, language, or citizenship. And then let's embrace diversity, complexity, and polyphony. So a dream of its own. Please note that these violations of the guidelines might result in removal from the session. But here I also always want to remind that equity work, anti-racist work, decolonial work is also about trying and failing and trying again. So we will all fail once in a while. Let's take this week as a practice. Also, if we fail in something, please let us know, and then we try to make it better together. Is there anything else? No? No? Okay, then I have the pleasure to introduce today's first keynote by Samira Ibn Al-Qaid, titled Intersectional Futures, Why We Need Accountability and Care. So Samira Ibn Al-Qaid is an Amazigh woman, migrant scholar, anti-colonial nomad. She is an affiliate researcher at the University of Oulu, the ICAR Laboratory Lyon, and Rabud University. Drawing on what she terms critical phenomenology of interaction, her work addresses the intricate relationships between mobility, intersectional identities, and power structures, focusing on how these dynamics are shaped by omnicolonialism and challenged through communal and digital practices. She argues in favor of translocal networks of multi-belonging and collective emotional, sensory, and epistemic intelligence. She is the author of the forthcoming book, Colonially Mediated Spaces and Beings, From Oppression to Liberation. And as said, this session has been pre-recorded. Tuukka, are we ready? Friends, here we go.
I speak here as a racialized woman, indigenous and nomad, from the Amazigh people of North Africa. I speak from a body and a lineage that have known oppression, extraction, physical and symbolic violence, exoticization, misnaming, and many attempts at erasure. I speak from the responsibility of asking what becomes when those with both formidable and cruel pasts persist in imagining, demanding, and building beautiful futures.
I play here as an Afropian man, a descendant of enslaved peoples brought to Reunion Island to be exploited, abused, commodified. Honoring my lineage and the Maroon heroes that freed themselves, I compose and play with decolonial intentionality. Through experiments and interactions, I seek to unsettle borders and defy the system.
We will talk here of intersectional futures. By intersectional futures, I mean futures that begin from the truth that oppression is multi-layered. It takes many forms, be they borders, gender norms, school curricula, economic pressures, racist algorithms, extractive practices, forced assimilation, stolen land, damaged ecosystem, and the everyday exhaustion of being forced to justify your existence. But intersectional futures are also futures of relationality and pluriversality. Futures where flourishing is not reserved for the most visible, the most fluent, most institutionally acceptable, or the most palatable to Western standards. Futures where racialized women, indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, queer and trans people, migrants, impoverished people, animals of all sorts, rivers, mountains, oceans, forests, and all vulnerabilized beings are listened to, protected, and supported. We will now move through 6 chapters. We live in a world shaped by colonialism, capitalism, and techno-feudalism. These systems reinforce one another. Colonialism organizes the world through conquest, racial hierarchy, land theft, epistemic domination, and extraction. Capitalism transforms life, labor, land, time, bodies, attention into resources for accumulation of wealth in the hands of the few. Techno-feudalism intensifies this by creating digital landlords, platform control, data ownership, surveillance infrastructures, and opaque AI ecosystems enclose our social worlds, harvest our data, and make us dependent on systems we do not govern. To understand where we are and where we are going, we need to understand colonialism as a historical structure that mutates. We can think of colonialism through 5 stages. The first stage is racially based exploitation. Colonial powers justified their actions through ideologies of racial superiority. They were necessary to make conquest appear moral, to make slavery appear natural, to make land theft appear civilizing, and to make the destruction of indigenous worlds appear like the expansion of history itself. The second stage is the political turn. Following the abolitions of slavery, colonial domination adapted. This stage marked the expansion of colonial territories in the late 19th and early 20th century and the emergence of new forms of injustice and inequity. One of the clearest examples is the financial compensation of former enslavers rather than formerly enslaved peoples. Freedom was declared in theory, but in practice, the economic structure of enslavement was protected. The burden of enacting freedom was still placed on the backs of the formerly enslaved, while the wealth produced by their stolen labor continued to circulate. The third stage is the economic turn. In the post-independence era of the 60s, many former colonies entered political independence while remaining trapped in economic dependence. Former colonial criminal governments and global financial institutions maintained influence through debt, trade rules, currency dependency, structural adjustment, resource extraction, and the power of multinational corporations. National economic system and political policy are imposed by Westerners, undermining genuine national sovereignty. The fourth stage is the digital and algorithmic turn. Since the early 2000s, a new dimension of colonialism has emerged through digital tools. So-called technological advancements contribute to new forms of control and oppression. Colonial control is being retooled through so-called artificial intelligence, extreme data collection, biased predictive models, automated decision-making, biometric identification, platform dependency, digital borders, and the enclosure of knowledge into privately owned infrastructures. Digital infrastructures convert people into data points that can be scored, ranked, predicted, profiled, managed, targeted, denied, disciplined. They extend racial, capitalist, and imperial hierarchies into computational systems. This data colonialism emphasizes the commodification of human life through data for profit and control. Under the current development of techno-feudalism, enormous digital platforms increasingly function like private sovereignties. They own the infrastructures of communication, commerce, visibility, cloud computing, cultural distribution, and social participation. Not only do they keep overselling products, they also shape the conditions under which each of us can communicate, work, organize, and exist. In this order, we are not only consumers, we are data sources, content producers, unpaid trainers of machines, and captive users inside privately governed territories. Tech billionaires or landlords, platforms or estates, algorithms or gatekeepers, terms of service or laws without democracy. A serious anti-hatred activism must be anti-colonial, it must be anti-capitalist in its analysis of extraction and exploitation, it must be anti-techno-feudalist in its refusal to let private digital empires govern the conditions of social life. And it must be intersectional, because the systems affect us all. They strike many differentiated bodies, lands, languages, spirits, and communities in ways that demand radical solidarity that transcends all boundaries. Intersectionality, as articulated by Kimberly Crenshaw and expanded by Black feminist, Indigenous feminist, decolonial, queer, disabled, and anti-racist thinkers and organizers, is a way of analyzing how power is structured through overlapping systems. A person may be targeted not simply because she's a woman, or racialized, or indigenous, or migrant, disabled, impoverished, or queer, but because these positions meet in the body and in social life. Oppression is not additive in a simple mathematical sense, but is produced and reproduced through interactions. This is why the wheel of privilege can be useful when handled carefully. It can show that each of us is located differently in relation to social racial affiliation, gender, class, physical and mental health, sexuality, citizenship, language, religion, education, body size, age, geography. But the will is only a starting point. which must not become a ritual of confession where people name privilege and then return to the same behavior. The point is not passive guilt, but responsibility and change. I want to use here the concept of omnicolonialism. Omnicolonialism operates as a matrix pervading 5 main spheres of human experience, each representing a distinct yet interconnected dimension of ongoing colonial influence on all living beings. Omnicolonialism pervades economic, cultural, corporal, spiritual, and ecological aspects of life. The economic dimension of omnicolonialism includes the perpetuation of socio-economic disparities, the burden of colonial debt, and the exploitation inherent in capitalist and imperialist systems. Inequality is reproduced through inherited wealth and structural accumulation. Capitalism survives through dispossession, privatization, and social-racially organized geographies. Some communities inherit land, savings, safety, clean air, and institutional trust, while others inherit debt, surveillance, polluted neighborhoods, precarious work, and the demand to be endlessly resilient. The rise of movements advocating for anti-capitalism, circular economies, translocal solidarity, mutual aid, reparations, degrowth, and common-based forms of organization reflects growing intersectional resistance to exploitative systems. These experiments across the world participate in dismantling the idea that capitalism is inescapable and that we are powerless in the face of imperialism. People across the world and at its margins experiment with creative forms of freedom. The second sphere, pervaded by omnicolonialism, is the cultural sphere. Colonialism's impact on cultural practices, including art, language, and knowledge production, is profound. The imposition of cultural hegemony and the confiscation of indigenous and other than Western knowledge systems have marginalized and devalued diverse scientific and artistic forms of expression. Colonialism indoctrinates colonized people into seeing themselves through the gaze of those who oppressed them and their ancestors. It tells us that our languages are dialects, our philosophy of folklore, our science is superstition, our art is inferior, our memory is fantasy. In response, we see cultural reclamation across the globe and indigenous people asserting their right to self-representation. We see the rise of ethical knowledge production, practices that respect and revitalize marginalized cultural traditions and epistemologies. For Amazigh people, as for many indigenous peoples, our languages are living archive. They carry ancestral socio-ecological knowledge, emotions, memory, ethics, relationality, resistance, and world-making. To defend our languages and culturalities is to defend a future full of memories. The third sphere, pervaded by omnicolonialism, is the corporeal sphere. Racism, sexism, ableism, fatphobia, queerphobia, transphobia, classism, and all forms of oppression are entrenched within social and digital structures. They dictate norms and hierarchies that govern bodily identities. They decide which bodies are protected, which are desired, which are disciplined, which are pathologized, which are searched, which are mocked, which are believed, which are mourned, and which are left to fend for themselves. The corporal sphere of omnicolonialism underscores the need for embodied freedom and the abolition of harmful binaries that perpetuate inequality and violence. This includes the refusal of colonial gender systems, racial hierarchies, beauty standards, productivity standards, and ableist ideas of worth. True bodily autonomy cannot exist where some bodies are treated as public property, security threats, reproductive vessels, labor machines, diversity symbols, or data sources. The fourth sphere, pervaded by omnicolonialism, is the spiritual sphere. The spiritual dimension of omnicolonialism is marked by the historical imposition of religious ideologies and the systematic destruction of indigenous spiritual practices. Colonial power sought to control not only the physical bodies, but also the minds and spirits of colonized peoples. They often eradicated, criminalized, or co-opted spiritual beliefs and practices. A people can be dominated not only by occupying their land, but also by breaking their relation to ancestors, to dreams, to ceremony, to the unseen, to birth, to death, to grief, to other than human kin, to sacred geographies, to cosmologies. The psychological violence of colonialism is paramount. The way domination enters the mind, the skin, the nervous system, the imagination. Liberation is therefore not only institutional, it's also psychological, spiritual, relational, and embodied. There are now growing movements towards restoring indigenous cosmological relations and integrating liberation psychology as a means of reclaiming spiritual autonomy and addressing the mental health impacts of colonial capitalist trauma. These are pathways toward our rights to exist and relate to one another outside colonial capitalist frameworks. The fifth sphere is the ecological sphere. The ecological sphere of omnicolonialism reflects the environmental degradation and exploitation that have accompanied colonial expansion. Land appropriation, speciesism, environmental racism, extractivism, border violence, climate injustice, and now AI's ecological disaster. The relentless pursuit of profit has led to the destruction of natural environments, the disruption of ecological balance, and harm to both human and other than human life. The climate crisis does not affect everyone equally. It has victims, it has perpetrators. It has geographies of sacrifice, it has geographies of protection. And AI adds another layer. Large-scale computational systems require energy, water, minerals, labor, land, and infrastructure. The environmental costs are differentially distributed. The mines, data center, the waste sites, the exploitative content moderation labor are all affecting already oppressed communities first and foremost. There is no immaterial cloud. The cloud needs land. The cloud needs water. The cloud needs workers. The cloud has victims. This highlights the vital importance of land protection, anti-speciesism, vegan ethics, accessible and culturally situated, slow technologies, convivial tools, and the restoration of the indigenous land relations. Subsistence perspectives and economies of enough can challenge the violent fantasy of endless growth. Together, these spheres of the omnicolonial matrix provide a framework for understanding the ongoing impacts of colonialism in all facets of life, but also for identifying already existing pathways toward decolonization, justice, and happiness for all beings. Intersectional futures require us to ask, who is missing from the room? Who is present but unheard? Who is not cited? Who is displayed but not trusted? Who is protected by conformity and who is punished for complexity? Who is asked to be patient while institutions learn what oppressed people have been saying for generations? After naming all of this, it would be understandable to feel overwhelmed. Colonialism mutates, capitalism exhausts, techno-feudalism destroys. People are drained. Nonetheless, there is hope, always. Our ancestors dreamed of us. Hope is a practice, bringing dreams into being. Hope is the decision to remain answerable to possibility, even when the present is organized to make possibility feel unrealistic. To build intersectional futures, we need radical imagination. Radical imagination is political work. Every oppressive system tries to colonize the imagination. It tells us that there is no alternative, that hierarchy is natural, that exploitation is inevitable, that borders are permanent, that poverty is personal failure, that technology must make us more productive, that care is superfluous, that indigenous knowledge belongs in museums, that disabled life is less valuable, that gender equality has already been achieved, that racial justice is reversed racism, that liberation is nonsensical. When a system repeatedly tells us that another world is impossible, dreaming becomes resistance. Speculative futures matter because they allow us to rehearse freedom before we have the institutions for it. They allow us to ask, what would education look like if it fostered curiosity instead of performance? What would technology look like if it were built for collective flourishing rather than productivity? What would cities look like if people with disabilities, children, elders, migrants, and other than human life were treated as central, not peripheral? What would climate action look like if it began with indigenous sovereignty, land restoration, and reparative justice? What would safety look like outside the harmful carceral infrastructure? What would knowledge production look like if it were decentralized? We need spaces where dreaming is protected, supported, acknowledged as a source of world making. We need time to imagine. Time is deeply political. Under capitalism, time is captured by survival, productivity, anxiety. Many oppressed people are denied the time to think beyond crisis. To create time for dreaming is therefore not a luxury but a necessary component of liberation. Imagination also needs method. We need to gather and reflect on what desirable societies look like concretely for each of us. We can create future archives, letter from descendants, maps of liberated cities, fictional policies from just societies, recipes for post-capitalist care, ceremonies for restored nature, manifesto from unborn communities, and so on and so forth. We can ask children what adults have forgotten. We can ask elders what modernity erased. We can ask people with disabilities how to design worlds that fit them. We can ask migrants what home can mean when on the move. We can ask indigenous peoples what relation means beyond ownership. And we can remember that oppressive systems were imagined too. Borders were imagined before being enforced. Nation states were imagined. Racial hierarchies were imagined. Gender roles were imagined. Factories were imagined. Banks were imagined. Algorithmic platforms were imagined. If violent worlds were imagined and built, then liberatory worlds can also be imagined and built. The difference is that our imagination must be accountable to all forms of life. Better futures for all require accountability. Accountability is one of those words that is often used and rarely practiced with depth and sincerity. Accountability can take the shape of public performance. It can become a way to distance harmful people without transforming the very conditions that allow harmful behavior to happen, circulate, and repeat. But without accountability, liberation becomes rhetoric. And accountability starts with oneself. It is often easier to identify harm elsewhere than to recognize the way we participate in it. Denouncing oppressive systems in public can be simpler than noticing how those systems have trained our reflexes, our desires, our silences, our ambitions, our fears, and our attachments. Racism, sexism, ableism, classism do not only exist outside of us, in institutions and infrastructures, but they also pass through us. They shape what we find normal, who we find credible, whose pain we minimize, whose labor we expect, whose anger we deny, whose boundaries we interpret as hostility, and whose knowledge we treat as optional. Self-accountability should not take the form of guilt, as guilt can become another way of centering oneself. Self-accountability is the practice of becoming less innocent and more responsible. We all need to examine the distance between our politics and our habits. We need to notice where we benefit from arrangements that we claim to oppose. We need to ask ourselves, before accusing others, what am I protecting? What am I avoiding? What do I know but refuse to act on? Where have I confused my good intentions with harmlessness? This is especially important in movements, institutions, and cultural spaces where the language of justice circulates easily. The fact that we know the vocabulary does not mean we are practicing the ethics. We can inherit oppression and still reproduce oppression. We can be harmed and still cause harm. We can speak from a wounded place and still need to hold ourselves accountable for the consequences of our actions. None of this cancels our pain. So before accountability becomes a demand we place on others, it has to become a discipline we cultivate in ourselves. This must begin with a willingness to be honest about one's own implication in the system. We need to hold ourselves and one another accountable for our actions, inactions, behaviors, and attitudes. This includes the harm we actively cause and the harm we allow, because challenging it would cost us comfort, access, funding, status, friendship, or institutional approval. Accountability also involves the ability to be interrupted. For those of us who speak about justice, the danger lies in becoming fluent in the language of liberation while remaining attached to domination in practice. We can say decolonial and still exploit people's labor. We can say intersectional and still amplify the same voices again and again. We can say community and still avoid necessary fruitful conflict. We can say care and still punish people for having limits. We can say anti-racist and still become defensive when racialized people describe harm. Sara Ahmed's figure of the feminist killjoy is useful here. The killjoy is the one who interrupts the happiness built on exclusion. She's the one who ruins the mood at the dinner table by naming the racism in the joke, the sexism in the compliment, the transphobia in the description, the colonial nostalgia in the anecdote, the ableism in the plan, the class contempt in the analysis. To be a killjoy is to refuse the enjoyment built on someone else's oppression and forced silence. Sometimes we must allow ourselves to sabotage the status quo in everyday life. I use the word sabotage carefully. By that, I mean the small, deliberate interruption of oppressive mechanisms that rely on our cooperation. Systems of dominance often persist because many people keep the machinery running through politeness, silence, obedience, professional caution, and the desire not to make things uncomfortable. Sabotage, in this sense, can be a grain of sand in the cog mechanism, small enough to be possible, but powerful enough to create disruption. Small enough to be available to many of us, but meaningful enough to disturb the permanent reproduction of harm. Every oppressive system depends on repetition. The same jokes, the same voices, the same citations, same gestures, same rewards, same extractive practices, same hiring patterns, same institutional statement, same aesthetics. But even the smallest sabotage has the power to interrupt that repetition. It can be modest, but it must be intentional. A grain of sand doesn't seem like much, but cog machinery stops through accumulated friction. Institutions can change when they are confronted from both harmed outsiders and insiders who actively stop making harm convenient. An accountable culture asks, what happened? Who was harmed? What conditions allowed the harm? What does repair require? Who has the responsibility to act? What must change so the harm is not repeated? What resources are needed? What boundaries are necessary? What forms of return are possible and what forms are not? Accountability also means using privilege materially. A person with institutional access can open doors without controlling the room. A person with citizenship can support those targeted by border control. A person with wealth can redistribute without demanding gratitude. A person with academic status can cite, hire, and support those whose knowledge is often marginalized or extracted. A person with whiteness can confront racism without centering their innocence. A person with able-bodied privilege can change pace, structure, and accessibility. A person with platform power can support social justice movements. Accountability is a practice of awareness and self-education. And yes, this can be difficult, but difficulty is not an argument against responsibility. Considering all the emotional, cognitive, socio-political, and spiritual work needed to open pathways to liberation, we need to care for one another. This may sound simple, but in our world, care is constantly commodified. Capitalism sells self-care as an individual purchase. The bath, the candle, the skincare routine, the resort retreat, the app, the productivity hack, even rest becomes something to optimize, aestheticize, and display. Care cannot be reduced to capitalist, individualistic consumption. Self-care has radical histories, especially in Black feminist thought. Audre Lorde argued that caring for herself was not self-indulgence but self-preservation and an act of political warfare. In that deeper sense, care means preserving life under conditions that wear it down. Care means protecting the possibility of continuing to think, continuing to resist, to organize, to love, to dream, continuing to breathe, continuing to exist. First, care transcends materiality, because it cannot be reduced to goods and services. Though we do need and deserve comfort, pleasure, beauty, softness, repair, and rest, when care becomes primarily a market, it risks becoming available only to those who can afford it. It can become a product rather than a relation, a luxurious lifestyle rather than an intentional practice, a private escape rather than a collective condition. Care must remain larger than what can be bought. A caring gesture may cost nothing and still matter deeply. Checking in on someone without expecting anything in return, offering a ride, sharing information, making food, listening with sincerity, saying, "I believe you," saying, "You matter," respecting a boundary the first time it is named, giving someone time when they need it, making spaces more accessible, asking respectfully how one's name is pronounced, gently asking one's pronouns, paying attention to who needs support, letting someone rest anytime they need it. These gestures create a secure environment, they build trust and reduce isolation. They allow us to be ourselves in the safest possible way. Care also transcends materiality, because we should not wait until we have perfect resources to begin caring for ourselves and for others. Many of us are taught to postpone care until we have more money, more stability, more time, more confidence, more institutional power, more clarity, more permission. But care can begin before abundance. Care can begin inside constraints. However, communities should not be forced to compensate for state abandonment, institutional violence, or capitalist extraction with endless unpaid care. Structural resources matter. Housing, quality food, clean water, rest, medicine, physical and mental health care, mobility, multilingual services, child care, disability access, legal support, grief support, safety, clean air should all be basic rights. Still, while fighting for those structures, we can refuse the lie that nothing meaningful can happen until everything is materially secured. A small act done with consistency can become a lifeline. Repeated gesture of kindness toward oneself can interrupt internalized violence. Repeated gestures of kindness towards others can become a robust architecture of solidarity. Care can be measured not by scale, but by intention and attention, and by the quality of relation it creates. Care also transcends time, because it asks us to challenge the hierarchy of urgency that governs our lives. Too often, care comes after everything else, after work, after deadlines, emails, administrative tasks, after meetings, after household work, after activism, after crisis, after exhaustion. Care becomes the thing we do if there is time left. And of course, under capitalism, there is rarely time left. So care must enter our schedules as seriously as any professional commitment. Time for oneself and time for community should not be treated as optional and endlessly cancelable. A walk, a shared meal, a meditation, silence, therapy, stretching, napping, a call with a friend, a community gathering, a day without productivity are part of our inalienable needs and rights. We also need to normalize saying no when time has been reserved for nothingness. Nothingness can be where the nervous system returns, where thought becomes possible again, where grief catches up, where the body speaks after being ignored, where imagination reopens, where we remember that our worth is not correlated with our outputs. We should not have to justify every protected hour with a respectable explanation. I am unavailable, can be enough. I need rest, can be enough. I reserve this time for myself, can be enough. I reserve this time for my community, should be enough. This is especially important for people who are expected to be endlessly available: racialized women, caregivers, activists, migrant, precarious workers. Care that has no boundary is meaningless. Care requires conflict skills. Sometimes care means refusing urgency, ending a harmful pattern, telling the truth, protecting a person from exposure. Sometimes care means protecting oneself from someone who refuses accountability. To care across time also means caring beyond the immediate moment. We care for ancestors by refusing an erasure. We care for descendants by refusing to leave them poisoned water and soils and broken institutions. Care is a commitment to continuity. Care also transcends space, because our responsibility cannot stop at what is geographically close to us. In intersectional futures, care cannot be limited to people who share our identity profile, our neighborhood, our language, culturality, or our immediate horizon. The wound does not need to resemble our own for us to be moved by it. The suffering of people elsewhere is not distant in any ethical sense when the system producing that suffering are connected to the systems organizing our own lives. Colonialism connects the world through extraction. Capitalism connects the world through endless consumption. Techno-feudalism connects the world through attention economies. Climate change connects the world through drought, fire, flood, displacement, and shared vulnerability. Our care must be at least as connected as the systems that harm us. But caring across space requires discipline. Otherwise, it can become overwhelming. We cannot respond to every crisis with the same intensity. We cannot carry grief at full volume. We cannot confuse constant exposure to suffering with meaningful solidarity. Watching everything burn through a screen can produce despair rather than action. So we need practices that transform overwhelm into situated responsibility. One way to do this is to connect with organizations, collectives, and communities already working where harm is happening, not to take over, not to speak for them, not to turn their suffering into a stage for our virtue. A white savior logic, and more broadly any savior logic, uses other people's pain to confirm one's own goodness. It rescues in ways that preserve hierarchy. Being an ally means listening, following the leadership of those affected. An ally uses privilege strategically and accepts correction. Each of us can ask, what skills do I have? What access do I have? What can I offer constantly? Translation, graphic design, childcare, financial resources, research, legal support, transport, facilitation, writing, cooking, hosting, amplifying, teaching, archiving, technical support, administrative labor, emotional presence, institutional pressure. We can always offer to make use of our own skills to contribute minimally but meaningfully. These too belongs in our schedules. Care for what happens elsewhere should not depend only on the sudden shock of a crisis or the temporary intensity of social media attention. We can reserve time to learn, to support, to donate, to write, organize, show up, to connect our local struggles with global ones. Scheduling this care helps us regain a sense of agency. Care across space also requires attention to technology. We must ask whether our tools support care or intensify extraction. Care may require slower tools, simpler tools, community-owned tools, tools we can repair, tools we can refuse, tools that do not require sacrificing our earthly resources. I want to conclude with the idea of neo-ancestralism. But first, let me iterate and reiterate. Indigeneity is not a thing of the past. Indigeneity is not a thing of the past. We are living peoples. And in contrast to the extractive and violent logics of Western rationalism, indigenous and ancestral epistemologies are rooted in relationality, sustainability, and intentionality. Knowledge is not conceptualized as a commodity to be owned and sold, but as a responsibility shared within a community and across generations. These ways of knowing are often embedded in lived experiences, spiritual practices, and embodied relationships with ancestors, land, water, animals. Relational epistemologies stress interdependence, not only between humans and other than human entities, but also between the knower and the known. Indigenous knowledge is generated within relationships through connections to place, land, and community. It is contextual, grounded, and reciprocal. Colonial regimes have long sought to suppress these modalities, criminalizing indigenous languages, banning ceremonies, and erasing oral traditions through forced schooling. In this context, the simple act of telling and retelling a story, of singing a song, or of carving a symbol becomes a decolonial act of epistemic resurgence. It is a refusal to be erased and a reclamation of the right to know and to tell on one's own terms. So I propose the movement of neo-ancestralism, a creative and experimental methodology for rebuilding knowledge systems rooted in ancestral wisdom while adapting to the hypermodern condition. This approach involves deconstructing westernized capitalist colonial logics, reclaiming indigenous and ancestral ways, and adapting in the hypermodern era. Neo-ancestralism recognizes the need to dismantle the systemic extractivism embedded in dominant paradigms while also cultivating the tools and modes of expression through which alternative futures might emerge. It is a future-facing epistemic orientation. Rather than attempting to preserve ancestral knowledge in a static museum-like form, neo-ancestralism seeks to reactivate ancestral intelligences in dynamic dialogue with the hypermodern present. It involves reweaving ancestral threads, rituals, relational ethics, aesthetic forms, cosmologies, into newly imagined constellations of knowledge-making that address contemporary struggles. Neo-ancestralism takes up the challenge to open pathway to alternative social and epistemic ecologies. But to do so, one must be willing to experiment, as it requires taking risks, breaking genres, and existing differently. Uncertainty, improvisation, and radical collaboration are the very condition for a future when knowledge is no longer monopolized but rewoven into the commons. The radical solidarity needed for a neo-ancestralism recognizes that our struggles are connected without being identical. There is no single solution, no single theory, no single model of healing, no single path to liberation. Communities have different cosmologies, wounds, strategies, responsibilities, and dreams. The task is thus to build networks of cooperation across difference. We can create small ecosystems of resistance and connect them to one another across the world. A community garden can be connected to a language school, a migrant justice group can be connected to a mutual aid kitchen, an indigenous land defense movement can be connected to anti-surveillance organizers, a feminist reading group can be connected to a disability justice collective. Artists, scientists, healers, farmers, teachers, lawyers, caretakers can all build together. Intersectional futures are not waiting for us fully formed. They are made in practice. May we become skillful dreamers. May we become saboteurs. May we become dangerous to systems of domination and gentle with the lives those systems have harmed. May we build futures where our peoples are not only surviving, not only resisting, not only justifying, but creating, resting, loving, choosing, remembering, and becoming.
Wow, thank you so, so much, Samira. That was really, really beautiful. Again, a reminder for everybody who is watching this stream, either here in the webinar or somewhere else, that all of these videos will remain on our website, softhatrednow.fi, so they can be disseminated or even rewatched that was so dense with loads of important information. So maybe it could be good to revisit it later. So friends, now we'll take a tiny technical break, after which we will continue into the conversation, Crypt Futures, Rethinking Time, Work and Care. This is Stop Hatred Now, day 5, and I'm Sonja Lindfors. We will continue in a tiny bit. Good morning, everybody, and warmly welcome back to the second day of, sorry, not second day, the 5th day of Stop Hatred Now 2026. Getting lots of days already. My name is Sonja Lindfors, and now we'll continue into a conversation, Crypt Futures, Rethinking Time, Work and Care. And as you see, we have now sign language interpretation available for this conversation. And you can also, if you are in the webinar, you can also pin the sign language interpretation in your own gallery view. So in this conversation, we will have Shar Heather, Jennifer Brow, Christine Bulund, and this conversation will be moderated by Anastasia A. Aletvin. Warmly welcome everybody to our last day of this webinar. We're so happy to have you. So now, I will give the floor to you. And in case there's any technical difficulties or anything, we will be here behind the scenes helping you. And you can also chat and get support that way. But now the floor is yours.
Morning, whatever time it is for Shar and Jan and Kristin and all of us here. So I'm A, it's they, them. I am a white, maybe somewhat pale person with short, dark blonde hair. I'm wearing a navy t-shirt and my hands are tattooed. I might be fidgeting, so you might see them. And behind me there is a background, a wall. 50% of it is painted white, the upper part, and then the rest is gray. It's plastered with handwritten notes and lots of precious printed matter. And I am zooming in from my studio on the island of Suomenlinna in Finland. And I will occupy this space heavily for the first 7, 8, 10 minutes, just so that I can furnish the room for us. And then we'll pass it on to the wonderful Christine, Shar, and Jennifer, and we'll turn on the very active listening mode and enjoy my second morning coffee moderating this conversation. I think CREEP, especially neurodivergent futures, might enjoy a little bit of a structure, of an agenda. So that's why I'm taking all this time in the beginning. First, content notes. We might ever so briefly mention some details of bodily details of disability. I don't know. But if that happens, because it is a panel about CREEP futures, that's going to be non-graphic. And also we are collectively, for the sake of CREEP futures, are quite critical of any sort of normative expectation to be available and evisceratingly vocal about your bodily being. So content notes, that's it. Then yes, this space is a webinar. You probably can't turn on your mic, but I will follow all your questions and comments and will address them at the very end of our Friday morning conversation. Feel free to send anything what's on your body and mind today. And now I will do a little definition work because CREEP futures are coalitional and they stay with difference and tension. And it might be good when possible to sort of define what it is that we're chipping in with. So that's why. If CREEP is this notion that's been buzzing around, but might not be in your immediate orbit, might not be in your immediate vocabulary, but you're sort of curious about its capacities. Maybe for a second, it can be helpful to think or reword CREEP futures as anti-ableist futures. And ableism, it might be helpful to think about ableism in this way that the communal multitasker, Talil El Lewis, thinks about it. So Lewis writes that ableism is this system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds, or body minds, based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. And all these ideas, they are rooted in eugenics, anti-blackness, misogyny, transmisogyny, cis heteronormativity, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. So they're not necessarily all attached to the infrastructures of hospitals, for example. And ableism is a systemic oppression, and it leads to people in society determining my value based on my culture, my age, language, my appearance, my religion, my place of birth or place of living, and then the way I might be classifiable in relation to health and wellness binary, and also my ability and readiness. That's where it also gets political, to happily or satisfactorily reproduce in all sorts of ways, or excel or behave. And importantly, you don't need to be disabled to experience ableism. And once you think about ableism from this perspective, you start to think about disability justice being also labor justice and environmental justice, and also decolonial work and anti-racist work, and et cetera, and et cetera. Then disability probably is another notion we should have somewhat defined. So once we're talking about disability, we are talking about a position of power, or actually with disability, with a position of being deprived systemically and structurally of agency. And disability is a political tool, well, once it's a concept, and we're not pointing at the material fact of my embody-minded difference, but we're pointing at the fact and politicize the fact of me experiencing my embody-minded differences in the normative world as it is. And it often also comes rather technically or pragmatically with bodies being exposed in certain ways for a norm to reappear. And then debility or debilitation is another word, notion, concept that would be good to have if you're just starting to think about disability justice. And debility and debilitation, they refer to all those experiences that might not be or actually are not at all associated with what we imagine medical industrial complex is, and they are with debility or debilitation, with those concepts, you can think and make sense and intervene to the extent your capacities allow to. Those disablements that happen during wars, capitalism, also in non-voyeuristic, non-oculocentric terms, colonial occupation. So it's a slow, structural wearing down of individuals, communities, populations. And now creep. So our central notion today, it is a slur that's being reclaimed by the international English-speaking community and all the people who have some political agency and capacities and access in different ways to shaping this language of disability justice otherwise, somewhat otherwise. And creep, it's not without its own contradictions, and I will say that for me, it's a very specific kind of identity that takes a shape of a political affiliation. And so it's a politics, it's a coalitional commitment, specifically to shifting material arrangements of the normative world in your immediate orbit, in your vicinity, in your individual relations. So I might be doing creep, and we usually say we do creep. As a theorist, as an art worker, as a teacher, as a partner, as a friend, sibling, colleague, neighbor. So in all of those relationships where ableism might have seeped, and it probably has seeped in all of them. And my coalitional commitment and my doing creep comes from this specific corporeal, bodily, and political place, which is also shifting and fluctuating. And so my creep bubbles or emerges with my non-apparent chronic illnesses that are a result of environmental violence and medical mistakes. It's also very much informed by the experience of queer and trans migration. It's informed with my experience of burnout within the premises of super ableist academia, and also, I guess, precarious living as a researcher and an art worker. It's all very heavily informed in, I guess, ambiguous and also fluctuating ways by the inheritance of the Russian imperial ableism, which is a very specific thing of its own. Yes, so it's this complex creature of a politics, and all of those strands of experiences, they are in generative tensions, and different body minds do creep in generative tension all the time, and that's the might of this way to politicize your experience. And on that note, I will quiet down and will pass it on to Jen, Christine, and Shar to introduce themselves in the way they'd like to sit in this space together today. And we thought that it might be generative to introduce our practices, or Shar's, Jen's, and Christine's practices, and also speak to what creep is and what it does in that context. And perhaps We can start with Shar. Sorry to put you on the spot. And then we can go with Jan, and then we can pass it on to Christine.
Hello, is my audio okay? Good. Hi, I'm Shar Heather. I'll give a visual description. I'm a light-skinned white person with clear glasses, shoulder-length brown hair in a room that is, even from the small amounts that are visible, quite messy. White wall behind me with a selection of art, which is pretty much all by Crip artists as well, which feels nice and appropriate for this space. And I am a researcher, a writer, and a workshop facilitator, and the founder of a DIY arts project called The Remote Body, which hosts online events, mostly to do with writing, that centre disabled people. And for me, all of those things that I do are very bound up in questions of Crip and questions of narrative and questioning the kind of dominant narratives that we're expected to follow in different spaces, whether that's dominant ways of doing narrative in literature or dominant medical narratives, the ways in which we're expected to speak of our experience and be in space together. For me, I was looking today at something I wrote last February and put out on the Remote Body newsletter about what cripping is to me, and just interested to see how that might have changed. And I think it has probably shifted a little bit, just as I've kind of read more and understood more about what cripping is, what cripping can do, and also how other people have spoken about cripping, especially in decolonial perspectives and Black disability theory as well. But I think one thing I always kind of stick with is to echo is the shifting of material arrangements, which Amy Hammery writes about. And a quote I use in everything I ever do pretty much is from Mills and Sanchez in the introduction to what's the book called? Oh my gosh, Crip Authorship, Disability as Method, which is that there is a strand of theory that understands disability to be a creative force, a spur, a method of production. The mismatch between disabled body minds and built and social environments leads to particular Crip ways of thinking, being, representing, and making. And that kind of encompasses a lot of the work that I do in terms of thinking how the generative frictions that come out of Crip identity and Crip methodologies can create new ways of doing and being, which might encourage kind of collective access or more ease for people to be in the world, talk about themselves, talk about their stories, alongside trying to infuse what I do with the kind of 10 principles of disability justice. So at the Remote Body, that focuses a lot on collective access, which is an ongoing, complicated thing in terms of you can't make a space accessible for everybody, but if access is an open conversation, we can do our best to work together and make a space accessible for as many people as possible. Obviously, the nature of the project being completely online already provides a huge access block to lots of people. The fact that the project is mostly based in European time zones makes it inaccessible for a lot of people. So there's loads of ways in which it is just inherently inaccessible, and that is, I think, an interesting place to work from, to not necessarily be like, well, it's bad then, but to think, how can we extend further access? How can we work together to make that space more comfortable, generative, easy for people to be in, whilst acknowledging the fact that we can't possibly kind of tick every box, as it were, and also acknowledging that access is much more than a box ticking exercise. And access, as A said, is about more than just disability, but about a whole plethora of intersecting experiences that people might have. I had one more little quote, which is the Margaret Price quote of Crip, or cripping rather, is infusing the disruptive potential of disability into normative spaces and interactions. And I think that's because I work in academia, I work in Crip community. That feels much easier to achieve in Crip community than it does in academia, but we're trying. We're trying to infuse that in there and finding ways in which those tensions can be productive, but also acknowledging when those tensions are just like shit and not helpful, and things need to be dismantled and rearranged, and the material arrangements need to be shifted. I'll stop there because I could go on for it, but I'll pass on to Christine.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel and for the possibility to be here. My name is Christine Bylund, and I'm based in Uppmeje on colonized Sami land in the north of Sweden. And I'm also a white person with brownish curly hair and a blue and white patterned top thing on. And I work as a researcher. I'm an ethnologist, so I work with everyday experiences and qualitative methods mostly. And my research centers out of need, I would say, onto the Swedish disability rights supports in the welfare state and contemporary austerity, but also hopefully I think of sort of this also as a kind of in the Swedish context, we have these quite impressive independent living laws put in place, but now they're becoming more and more hollowed. And I think there's also something about utopian way of showing what was possible to do in the past, in the 80s and 90s, and what disabled people in Crip communities did on their own in that sense. And I also work as a performer and a workshop facilitator and sex educator. So I try and mix a little bit of everything into my work. And I would say for me, personally, I came to Crip theory through a kind of queer disabled sort of community that was not necessarily based in Sweden. So digital spaces and digital community is quite important for me. And I would say that we are quite a few researchers now in Sweden who work with disability themes or who work with Crip themes that are using Crip theory, but it's not very common, neither in academia or in disability rights community on its own. So I think for me, my Crip identity, but also the possibilities that it brings to work with Crip theoretically and practically has been very liberating for me. So I would say for me, the term Crip is liberation in that sense, and a profoundly demedicalizing experience. I was also born with my disability, so there's lots of medicalized experiences engaged and more or less forced medical interactions or rehabilitation or habilitation practices that I thought was and I think I'm 40 now, so I think maybe I came across the term Crip in my mid-20s, and I think since then it's been really a liberating practices for me to also turn the script on the sort of general understanding of disability as deficit and so on. So I'm really excited to be here. And I think I'll stop there and hand it to Jen. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jen. I am a white person. My pronouns are she, they, and I have short brown hair and I'm wearing a big yellow jumper against a blurred white background. I'm a slow writer and workshop facilitator. I organise with a group of disabled artists and practitioners called Resting Up Collective. And we're currently doing a program called Crip Resistance, which will be our second iteration of the program. And in my kind of programming work that I do with Resting Up and Art Gallery, we curate spaces and workshops that offer spaces of interruption for Crip folks and kind of design spaces where people can assemble online and create temporary worlds that hopefully offer opportunity for connection and togetherness. And I think I was thinking while Christine and Shah were talking about that bell hooks quote where she writes that I came to theory because I was hurting. And I think that's kind of how Crip theory found me, or vice versa. And I think finding like the sense of community and opportunities to create, not from a deficit, as Christine was saying, and viewing Crip as a kind of organizing principle that is something we share but needs to be located along intersections, has been really helpful for me, not only processing how I feel about my body, but how I can work with other bodies and minds in Crip space with intentionality. And I also have some quotes that I'd like to share about how I feel about Crip. So kind of thinking with the late Alice Wong, who wrote, "To Crip something is to bend, compress, twist, subvert, and imbue disabled wisdom into systems, institutions, and cultures." And I kind of think of Crip as, like I said, an organizing principle, but also a shorthand way of localizing each of us across positionalities and the intersections of disabled lives. And definitely as a verb, to echo what A said, Crip is something that is constantly in motion, it's constantly shifting, and it's uprooted and replanted across theory to lived experience and vice versa, and acknowledges the different ways that lived experience can impact world building within certain spaces to subvert them, like academia or medicalized spaces. And I think, to kind of wrap up, Hamre and Fritsch see Crip as a practice that acknowledges Crip folk as effective agents of world building and dismantling worlds towards more socially just relations. And I think a lot about the possibility for world building and the kind of utopian, dystopian, topian project that Crip kind of affords. And I also want to say that if any black shapes move in front of my camera, it will be my cats. And I'm sorry that if they meow or do disruptive things. But yeah, really happy to be here with you all. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Jen, Christine, Shar, and the cats. I would so love them to meow with us and join this conversation on Crip doings. And I love how we already have lots of materialities of Crip doing and Crip world making. I love a flood of references because I think we don't come alone into spaces like this. And Crip sounds and is feisty based on all of your practices. And maybe I will cling for a second to Crip theory as the notion that sort of glanced over everyone's introductions. I've recently been, and I think actually it's a recurrent experience, in some rooms where there is this interest in affect towards the notion of Crip theory, as if it's something new and it's sort of buzzing and it's fashionable. And for me, it's a bit confusing because I might have, it's hard to track back, but I might have discovered Crip maybe 10 years ago. And then, of course, it has been around for much longer before I came across this affiliation. So what do we do? How do we feel? What do we think about this interesting affect attached to, in some rooms, probably institutional rooms? Also, it's if there is a buzz, and I think a part of this affect is like always this like fashionable, sexy thing. Do we like that there is this affect? Do we need to keep it or revisit and revise the terms? Because I think Crip partially is a critical revision of vocabularies. What do we do with this buzz and sexiness of it, of crip theory. Should I ask Christine maybe to speak first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think this is really interesting, and I think it has been a bit sort of coming and going, this kind of sexiness assigned with crip. And I think it's important also to state that in Sweden right now, we have quite a conservative and fascist, racist, ableist government. So we're in quite a different discourse than we were perhaps 5 or 10 years ago. And I think this was mostly this kind of buzz was coming from a more perhaps queer or intersectional justice based movements. And I think it's something that's very I would like to be able to just kind of go with that and popularize a term in that sense, but I think there's also a lot of crip washing, so using the term to create this buzz around events or sort of things, discussions that are not necessarily accessible. And I think it was, for me, I've had a lot of those experiences where also this notion of being alienated, perhaps in spaces or communities that I would really love to for being accessible, or I would really enjoy them. And they might have used this kind of buzz in vocabulary or promoting, and then you come there and it's not physically accessible or not cognitively accessible. And I think I am a bit jaded by those types of experiences. And I think also in my work and in my thinking of sort of crip justice or disability rights, I'm very much a sort of materialist person. And I think this is also the case even for what we would consider immaterial accessibility, for example, I think is material because it's being acted out in physical spaces. So I think this is also sometimes this bus is used as a tool to sort of create this bus without having taken any sort of accountability into access and so forth. And I think those things are what's most sort of jading for me. And I think also it's used in Sweden. There's a lot of sort of language is moving quite quickly and sort of back and forth in terms of disability terms or crip language. And there is one term especially, funktionsvariation, which might be translated to sort of ability variations. So, and it was coined by an autistic trans writer called Emanuel Brandemo, and it quite sort of quickly came into the lingo and is used now to mean just a disabled person or someone with impairment. And Emanuel had to make this sort of blog post saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry I made up this word because it's not being used in the way I would like to. It's not being used to describe a general variation of people and sort of abilities for everyone, and to talk about what are your abilities and what are mine and how can we kind of have them coexist. It's been co-opted to just mean a disabled person or person with impairment." And I think that happens really, that's specifically a Swedish thing, maybe, that all the terms that we try to coin in sort of a crip direction gets co-opted to just mean disabled person or person with impairment. And I think that's also something that I'm wary about this bus, that I think, for example, funktionsvariation is a term that could have been really used politically and used in terms of opening up this crip notion of ability being something that everyone has, and that's, we all carry sort of privileges in that sense, or we all have differences in ability, and then it has just been co-opted as a sort of buzzword, and to not use then this sort of quote unquote, I wouldn't say ugly, but perhaps more dated term of disabled person. So something happens with the Swedish condition where politicized language is kind of washed out. And I'm worried in that sense with this kind of buzzing around the word crip that eventually will mean nothing, or it will just slide back into meaning a disabled person. So, but I would really like for it to, and I think it's happened within the disability community in Sweden more, that not necessarily people might not use the term CRIP to describe themselves or to describe the community, but there is much more of a sort of generative aspect and a verb in how people identify themselves or speak about themselves and speak about disability rights. Yeah. I don't know if that was coherent at all. I feel I just went off on a tangent. Please, anyone more?
This was very generous. I think I need to grab my paper because I ran out of my massive A3 page already. Yeah, oh gosh, this resonates loads. I think I use CREEP. I'm very sort of defensive, I feel, about CREEP within universities, especially, possibly within bigger art institutions. And then I also do use CREEP only when I feel defensive. So yeah, it's again in the very same senses. But I'll pass it on to Jen now, maybe, to continue with this CREEP theory buzz and how we feel about it.
Thank you. And it's so interesting to hear how these terms are used and co-opted in different settings. I think in the UK, we have a similarly kind of right-leaning, fascist, racist government. And I couldn't even imagine what that party and that mindset meeting CRIP would be. I think it's just so far from the realms of probability. Yeah, and I think, well, I don't think CRIP is like as, I mean, definitely used amongst you know, disability groups and organizers, but I don't think it would, I don't know whether that's like a blessing or a kind of curse, whether it would ever meet that kind of mainstream. But in terms of like disability, which is the word that's probably more popularized in terms of how people identify and like movements, I think it's always this double-edged sword of when something gains popularity, right? Like, is it like, especially among large institutions, and when this kind of vocabulary enters the mainstream, as you were saying, Christine, it gets completely co-opted or diluted or so far removed from its radical origins that we're wondering kind of how have we got to this place in a sense. And I think obviously it is a good thing when disability is part of like popular vocabulary and it's more talked about. But at the same time, it's like, are these moments of intervention being organised by CRIP folk, or, you know, whose voices are being excluded or included? And is it just like institutional lip service, or is it genuinely kind of disruptive moments that can change a perspective? You know, I'm thinking of things like when it's Pride Month and banks change their logos to be rainbows, and you're like, are you actually doing anything? Or is it just, you know, are we doing this for a month and then we're going to go back and not do anything? And, you know, things like Primark, for example, which is like a big you know, fast fashion place on a lot of high streets, they have a range of adaptive clothing, which is obviously really useful for people who need that. But at the same time, if it's made by workers in South and Southeast Asia who are experiencing, you know, labor violations, how do we get from there to here, and how do we connect things that are all, you know, interconnected, and how do we prioritize this kind of global focus of disability and access for all and rights for all? But, you know, with that kind of like slightly more cynical perspective said, I did enjoy an exhibition last year in the UK at the V&A, which is a big cornerstone art institution that has a colonial legacy. But the exhibition was called Design and Disability, and it showcased the kind of radical history of disability organising and art making, and it was curated by disabled practitioners. And I think, you know, it was like, oh my gosh, this is by us and for us, which I don't think happens as often. I think art spaces are perhaps the places that it would happen more likely, but again, to have disabled people in an organising role, I think is both crucial and rare. And obviously there are these kind of tensions which we'll talk about in terms of, you know, having exhibitions that are celebrating radical potential and liberatory possibilities, but in these spaces that have these brutal histories, right? But yeah, I think for me, as long as it's accessible and coming from the disability community, I think that's always who we should be listening to, you know?
Yeah, creep theory as theory for and by, and then oozes into practice. Yeah, very much so. Also, you'd think a basic principle of world making otherwise, but not really in practice. Yes, Char, how do you feel about this buzz? Or do you feel the buzz?
I feel like what Jen and Christine have said sums it up very, very well. I think that the only kind of thing I can add to it is there is, in the kind of idea of it being buzzy and sexy, there is this exciting potential in that disability is very rarely positioned as desirable or as the future that anybody wants. Alison Kafer writes on that quite a bit. And we're probably going to talk about crypt futurity in a bit, but there is this exciting potential, but I am way too pessimistic to really lean into it, that the sexiness and buzziness of crypt theory can then position it as something that people are kind of desirous of within the academy, within art spaces, within all these different places. But as we've seen with other terms, they, like queer and queer theory, they get bandied about a lot. Yeah, this is going to sound really self-effacing, and I don't mean it to be, but I'm interested in the fact that whenever I pitch like an academic article or something, if I have the word crypt in the title, it always gets accepted, like just without them reading anything. And that's not happened loads because I don't pitch a lot because I have very limited energy, but I have this suspicion that part of that is not because the work I'm doing is necessarily like brilliant and worthy. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but I think a lot of the reason that I get accepted a lot for doing things like that is because they're like, oh, okay, crypt, right, that's a thing, and there's not necessarily enough people submitting things with crypt like in the title. But yeah, I think as what others have said, it's then using it as a buzzword that's actually devoid of the kind of radical potential, devoid of disability justice as an organising principle, then it becomes this kind of flattening of the term that could become quite dangerous. Having said that, I think in the wider spaces, I feel like nobody, like where I live in a small town in the north of England, like nobody's ever heard of crypt theory. I am alone. People only know about crypt as a word in kind of casual conversations because I've annoyingly brought it up yet again. So I think it's interesting that in these kind of very specific bubbles, it's become kind of a sexy word, but in broader terms, it's completely unknown as well. So I think trying to like forge a way forward where maybe more people are aware and using those principles without completely diluting it is a place of tension. And as someone who is quite pessimistic, I'm wary about how we tread forward with that, but also kind of interested to see how it might manifest as well.
And also what to do with the fact that, of course, there is loads of individuals, communities, big and small, doing creep, but not speaking the language we happen to have access to. I think I'm maybe there. Well, maybe like my concern is there at the moment, and somehow I just don't notice buzz that much. But now that we are getting cranky and bringing up all these affects, I think crankiness is one of my main creep affects. I thought if we could take a minute to make ableism more tangible, we have been already, because it's impossible not to once you are, once you start to define and once you actually practice theory or think of theory as a practical tool. But yeah, I wondered if we could contour a little bit bolder, I guess, what we are dreaming away from and working away from. Like, what is it that institutions don't understand about access guidelines, why institutional modes of access as inclusion doesn't really do much for crip futures. Why is it that it's important, for example, for me and for Christine, because we're in Finland and Sweden, to always think about access as also a decolonial doing because we are living in settler colonial states? And why is that not a part of access guidelines usually or conversations, institutional conversations about access? Yeah, what are we practically cranky about? A million things I know, but maybe the crankiest today. Shar, would you like to pick up?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I'm cranky about a lot of things. I wanted to, so I've just read Kairani Baraka's Anna Infinite, which I think is Anna Infinite. Yeah, that's correct. I wasn't sure which way around it goes. Which I think employs a lot of crankiness, and I think talks very well about like academia and the institutional inaccessibility of that from myriad different angles, so including kind of ableism, but also just completely devaluing particular forms of knowledge. So the quote I have here is from Oka saying, "My womanhood, my race, my nationality, and my disabled, chronically ill and pain status, as well as the cripping and anti-colonial perspectives in my art, are all factors linked to what Havi Carell and Ian James Kidd call the presumptive attribution of characteristics like cognitive unreliability and emotional instability that downgrade the credibility of testimonies." And my memory's not always great, but from what I remember in the text, Kairani talks about knowing certain things, specific things, because of their culture, their background, where they grew up, that were intrinsic knowledges that the academy was like, well, back that up though, and there is kind of no academic way to back it up, so kind of having to use these very Western colonial contexts to like justify, I guess, this like inherent gained knowledge that has come through all these different areas, which for me links to maybe loosely, but to a lot of what I work on in terms of the narratives that are allowed, narratives that are deemed legible. And so I write a lot about medical narratives and how we're meant to kind of speak of our experience, and the medical narrative that is usually very at odds with a lot of disability experiences. And for me, I have a chronic illness, so very specifically the chronicity of certain illnesses that don't subscribe to what like Western medicine would like the narrative to be. And so for me, I'm very cranky about being expected, well, for stories to end in cure or death, basically. That's how illness and disability goes. Like this very curative, imaginary curative logic that completely obscures any future for someone who's chronically ill or sick, and the ways that is not just in medical settings, but it really trickles into much wider culture. You know, when you have people saying, "Oh, if that happened to me, I'd just rather die," and that kind of very normalized way of talking about experiences that other people are having and living, and having very worthy, amazing lives, like not free of pain and discomfort necessarily, but that it really downgrades our humanity, I think, as if I don't know, I'd say something that maybe going too far into triggering topics. But yeah, I'm really interested in how we can then, both in a kind of more literary bent, but also in a more social bent, one, believe people based on what they tell us, like actually value kind of testimony and privilege that in all sorts of settings, in academia, in medicine, in just general conversation. There's this real was the hermeneutics of suspicion. People are very suspicious of a lot of kind of testimonial stuff. I guess phenomenology works in some way against that, but also just in allowing a story to not end, or to not end in these expected ways. Yeah, I feel like I could go on for a long time, but I want to keep space for everybody else. But yeah, narrative and testimony are spaces of where I've witnessed a lot of ableism and dehumanization as well.
Yeah, and chronicity of illness. I guess I like language these days. Like, I would like to have very punchy and defensive language to talk about time and accommodation of temporality, or I guess I might need when I work, but also in individual relationships. I don't think I have it yet. I mean, your work is very formative in that regard. But yeah, like living time differently, and how it rubs against the normative one, which is more than just weak and productive. I think, yeah, very much cranky about that as well. Jan, would you like to be cranky with us about something else?
Yeah, I'm always somewhat cranky about something, so thank you for the invitation to be publicly annoyed. I guess extending on what Shah was saying, I'm thinking a lot about the kind of impossibility of access to a lot of major institutions and cultural spaces for people who are outside of the kind of white colonial model that they're based on. And I think, you see it especially in like call outs for art practices, and like even, in just things like jobs, there's this language of like inclusivity, where people say they prioritize applications or like ideas from people who are Black and brown, from people who are disabled, part of the LGBTQ community, but the institutional models that prioritize whiteness and disadvantage these other intersections of identity aren't changed. So it's like, what are we actually doing here? Are we just including a nice little sentence so we feel good, or how do we make things genuinely accessible? And I guess I always come back to Mia Mingus and the kind of idea of liberatory access. And she wrote that I don't just want technical and logistical access. I don't just want inclusion. I want liberatory access and access intimacy. I want us not only to be part of spaces, but for us to be able to fully engage in spaces. I don't just want us to get a seat at someone else's table. I want us to be able to build something more magnificent than a table together with our accomplices. And I think in our work with Resting Up and Art Gallery, a lot of the work we do is kind of from this access done in service of love and justice and connection, and the idea that community is liberatory. And the like programming, for example, that we do with Art Gallery to make these spaces of online disability points of connection, they wouldn't be possible with a lot of other galleries. And it's only through the work of someone like Aisha or Art Gallery who lets us not only lets us, but like champions our kind of like slow curation and switches to WhatsApp and like lets us voice note at like odd hours and all of these things that make programming possible in a truly CRIP mode that operates from a point of care. And I think, I think I'm really grateful in a lot of CRIP spaces that I'm part of where people do operate on a reduced capacity. There is like this inherent grace and a care model at work, which I think is absent from a lot of institutions, basically, where it's more about a policy or like a finger pointing exercise or numbers, and care isn't prioritized. And I think, like working with Art Gallery has been a real exercise in slow time and care, and often painfully involves confronting one's own internal ableism, but doing and trying in spite of that. And I think, that's not often the kind of space to work in a, not just work, but be in a kind of CRIP, flexible, caring space isn't always an option within institutions and just general ways of being. And I think I wish that, non-cooperative body minds like everywhere got the chance to experience a more caring world to navigate, I think. So not only when you're engaging in the work you have to do to live, but also just the kind of, on a wider sense, I guess, people operating more from a place of care in any public space, really. So yeah, I'd just like everyone to be a bit more caring. It is the too long don't read of that, but yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And maybe also read disability justice principles and actually ask and not imagine without us the care part, the pragmatic and practical care part. Yes, Christine, does it feel cranky, this whole bubble?
Yeah, I made lots of notes when listening to Char and Jens. Have to maybe revisit. I think it's also for me in a Swedish context important to bring in this notion of Swedish exceptionalism, and I would like to quote one of my favorite quotes on that, which is a Sami activist and teacher called Karin Stenberg, and she writes in 1920 that there is no country as sort of devoted to their own notion of superiority than the Swedes. And I think this is really important also for the disability rights movement in Sweden that we have had for the longest time. This notion of, and I think there was lots of direct action and other types of activities brought in creating accessibility and support systems in Sweden, but they were done so through sort of government and parliamentary democracy. And now when we have this for a couple of decades now, we've had this kind of very anti-disability rights governing, and we don't get the discussion that we need. And I think lots of Swedish disability rights movement is quite taken aback by that, and we don't know how to organize ourselves. And if we don't have this kind of communication with people who are willing to put these measures in place, so I think that's something to be sort of generally cranky about. And I think this notion of exceptionalism also makes it quite hard for the general Swede, so to speak, who might not have experiences to grapple that these are things that happen to other people in Sweden, or that the Swedish state can do this to their citizens. And I think this is something that's also we share with other minorities, so indigenous peoples in Sweden or the immigrants, and so there's this friction, I think, that makes one a bit cranky about living in a kind of upside down version of Sweden, whereas everyone else has a different understanding of what the government is and what these supports are, where it would be very different. But I also, when you spoke earlier about making ableism a bit sort of more tangible, I think a lot about as an academic and as a performer, having had access to a lot of institutions. A couple of years ago, I worked at the National Theatre in Sweden in this kind of flagship CRIP performance that they put together, and we were promised so much accessibility by the institution, and there was lots of physical accessibility, and they refurnished the entire entrance, and they made accessible bathrooms, and so it took forever, of course, so we could only use them when the performance period was over. But I think one of the most cranky things about that experience and really jaded is that there's no there was no leeway for flexibility in terms of time and spontaneity, and I think that's similar in academia, that it might be very forgiving in terms of you work when you can work, and that also means, of course, you can work forever. So that's also, you can work 24 hours a day if you would like to. So that's also ableist idea, but it gives you a bit of flexibility. But then we have also these kind of, comes with a certain understanding of productivity that we then should produce all the time now, and we really more and more in a hierarchical setting. And I think I try my best. I say to the people that I meet now that are also CRIP academics that I work with CRIP working hours. So I work now under the ambition that I work as little as I feel I can, and then if someone tells me that I should work more, then I work more. And it's not happened that anyone's told me that I should work more. So I think this is also, and that took me a while. I'm also from a sort of blue collar working background, and I have this notion of like, if you work, then you work at a care home for 10-hour shifts, and there's no one to tell you that you need to sort of, you don't have the possibility to sit down and rest. So I think that's also something that's been very subversive for me, to kind of have the possibility to take back what it means to work. And I think that's really a privileged position in terms of looking for other queers who might be having working class jobs or working manually with their bodies, or being unemployed, having to sort of work with these systems of support rather than working with something you would like. Yeah.
Yes, oh gosh, so much there. I also, one thing that I wanted to have in the space, and I think it's sort of coming from what Christine, you were saying, or sort of loosely, access exceptionalism and Finland, Finnish exceptionalism and access exceptionalism makes it unlivable for a lot of people actually who spoke in the panels throughout the week. Might not be, we might not be using Greek, and it might not be the word in their vocabularies, but Finnish access exceptionalism is a huge thing, and we could have a whole different panel on it. But being aware of time, maybe we could take the last 5-7 minutes to actually talk about little things which you would like to take into CRIP Futures. Are we taking access? Are we stealing something from where we are, or are we teaching others or encouraging others to steal something? For example, time. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about little huge things we are taking into CRIP Futures and Futurities. And Jen, would you like maybe to go first?
I would love to, thank you. So I guess I'm always very grateful to Shah for like sharing their knowledge with me. And Shah introduced me to CRIP negativity, and it was like very revelatory for me. And I think Smiljas puts a name to a practice that I and many other CRIP folk engage in within a capitalist work system, like, you know, very much an advocate for like taking a nap on company time if you can, and like blocking out time for, you know, a meeting when you have a hospital appointment. And Smiljas writes, I told a couple of lies today because I recognized that I had access needs that would not be met if I did not meet them myself. I did not wait until my well-being depended on others' provision of my access. I stole the access that I needed in order to flourish. And I think, as Christine was saying, I think this sort of access thievery obviously comes from a place of privilege and isn't possible in jobs where you are working with your body. And I think trying to find ways to navigate around that isn't always possible. But I think for me, divesting from this kind of notion of like being a good worker has been very helpful in terms of correlating that with like Crip identity. And, you know, I don't think that like all of these things that structure capitalist worlds, like meeting deadlines and climbing a corporate ladder, like those aren't aspirational for the kind of life that a lot of people want to live. But also using kind of access thievery as a way of knowledge sharing is something that I think I witness in a lot of UK disabled spaces, especially because of things like the benefit system here, which is notoriously strict and scripted and uncompassionate. And there are a lot of, you know, things like message boards and encrypted spaces of people sharing their experiences and knowledge of how to navigate these worlds to get the outcome that you need. And that, you know, is an example of access thievery, or things like sharing sharing experiences for medical appointments and treatments when you are navigating these inherently hostile spaces. And that's something that I've done, you know, in my personal life when people have come to me thinking that they have a diagnosis that I have, and kind of sharing the knowledge of how to prepare for an appointment, how to navigate dismissive and avoidant systems to get positive outcomes by sharing this kind of vocabulary of care. And yeah, I think it's like, especially among the Crip communities that I'm part of, I think having that shared vocabulary and sharing of experiences in order to navigate these difficult systems has been really crucial to the way I view community. So yeah.
Yeah, so stealing access and being generous, that's what some things we're taking. Shar, what are we packing on your watch?
I mean, definitely what Jen said. I have a big post-it stuck up that just says "Steal from the access rich," and I think that forms a lot of. I hope no one's listening, but a lot of my interactions with institutions, universities, is how can I use the privilege I have by being part of this institution to like disseminate things, without putting myself in a position where I can get told off or thrown out. I think also kind of creating things together, creating spaces and drawing on those networks. With Resting Up at the moment, I've been part of what will be a screening of a new film by the artist Sop, who is maybe here actually. And this has been a really nice kind of just reminder of when Crip people work together to like promote's maybe not the right word, but like to do something that's for us, with us, and we can do it in a way that feels a lot more nurturing, and also get to like celebrate really cool things that have been made within the Crip community. So I definitely think that kind of complex constellatory way of being and making and doing that comes from Crip community is really important. Also, I guess bringing disability into the future and ensuring that if we're thinking in any kind of utopian way, we're thinking in very critical utopian ways. Maybe utopia is not the right word for what I mean, but when we're imagining futures, creating futures where even, you know, in the science fiction kind of context, we're creating ones that have disability and difference as part of that. I just read Sami Schalk's The Body Reimagined, and Schalk talks about Marge Piercy's book, The Woman on the Edge of Time, which there's lots of things about that book that I really love, but in the utopian society that's created, racism doesn't exist anymore because everybody has kind of become one and the same race. Disability doesn't exist anymore because medical advancements have meant they can eradicate it. And so this utopian project is one built on people can't be racist or can't be ableist because there is no difference. And I think it's really important because that creates a whole eugenicist logic. and curative logic. And it's really important to create spaces where we can work and imagine otherwise because I think that is a really important part of the project of building a better future, without flattening things. And I did want to briefly mention, well, one, I've just put out an anthology called Out of Sorts, which is very much about disabled people using their experiences to inform their writing, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, and about writing oneself into the past, present, and future. But also Everything for Everyone by Eman Abdulhadi and Emmy O'Brien have created a new project called Project 52, where lots of people are writing these futures essays from this future imagined world that are very critical. And then texts like Abolition Science Fiction, which was a project that was done to kind of just write different versions of the future as to what might happen from an abolitionist perspective. I think all of these things are really generative and important and exciting, and also just make me feel very, very good when I can read something that is proposing a future that isn't perfect or utopian necessarily, but is taking into consideration what things might look like in the future that generates more ease and less ableism without a eugenicist logic of like eliminating disability and other forms of difference. I think that's really important work. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. And Christine, what the very last little thing, not the very last, the massive, which we're packing with us.
I would like to mention that it's really important for me to disseminate the work I do academically to disabled people outside of academia. So that's one part of my work. And I think I've written a piece that's sadly in Swedish, but it's called Blunt Tools in the Master's House. So it's this alludation to Audre Lorde. So what can we do with the tools we are given in academia? And one thing that I never thought I would do is that now I teach a crip boxing class, which is brilliant. I've really been one of these, like, because I had so much rehabilitation exercises as a kid, I thought I would never do this, but this is a crip-led crip boxing class for crip people, and I think it's been really lovely. It's anger management, and you can move your bodies in ways you would like and feel powerful. So I also would like to take that and to I think crankiness is really important, and we've talked about it in lots of ways here, but to also bring, and I think maybe to younger people, young adults or kids, to be like, it's going to be terrible at times, but there is community and we can help you. I think Jen shared beautifully about that with community, sort of knowledge transformation about navigating these kinds of systems. So also that, and I think in that sense, I would like to end with this quote by Anthony Gramsci, who I've carried with me: pessimism of the intellect and positivity of the will. So we know what it's like now, and it's quite terrible in Sweden and in other places, but it's been done before, and we can do it again, and we do it together in community. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've been doing all the way. Thank you so much. So we're packing all of that into our anti-utopian, in normative sense, non-eugenic futures, where there are plenty of disabled people who are not flattening difference. We do close read disability justice principles every now and again, have them on a post-it in front of you. And these futures should be sexy and intimate and fragmented and decolonial and anti-imperialist, because of course. Yes, so we spilled a little bit on our creep time. I will thank you again, everybody. And pack this massive intellectual crush on everybody, and let it drive my Friday. Thank you, Sonia, for hosting and assembling us.
Thank you so much, Christine, Char, Jen, and A. I took also so many notes, so many thoughts are buzzing through my mind, and this was a really beautiful combination with Samira's first introductory video keynote. So this was a beautiful combination. Thank you so much. So friends, now we are approaching the end of the day. We're just going to very shortly wrap up with Monica Gatuo and Kemme Pelliser, who are the co-curators of this year's festival. We'll take a tiny 1-minute technical break, and then we'll just shortly end up, and that is the end of today's webinar. But thank you, Shar, A, and Jen, and best of luck to the spring. We'll see you everybody in a bit. That was indeed a very short technical break. I think we're ready to go to our last bit, aka some reflections and thoughts with Keme Pellicer and Monica Gattuo, the co-curators of this year's platform. Hello, Keme, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing fine. I'm full. I'm thankful. A bit tired. It has been intense, but wow.
Yeah.
It has been amazing.
Yeah.
How about Monica? How are you doing?
Yeah, I got sent to this last keynote of Samira's, so I'm like, I still need to contemplate. I think the whole weekend, but also this week has been so rich. And I'm just so thankful for everyone who joined, and everyone who came to speak, everyone who participated, anyone who just took the time. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm also feeling very full. So many thoughts. I have so many kind of like scribblings everywhere in my notes. I will need a few weeks or a few months or a lifetime to kind of like collect my thoughts. So friends, now we don't have a lot of time. Like we are already a bit over time. We're going to use maybe 10-ish minutes to go through some thoughts. Basically, for everybody to kind of like know, Stop Hatred Now is co-produced with 13 other arts and culture organizations. It is initiated by Urbanapam, which is a striving to be anti-racist and intersection feminist art platform. So basically, we'll kind of like workshop with some of the participants. What are our needs, urgencies? What do we need to talk about? Who do we want to lift or highlight during the year? And then Monica and Keme kind of like then bring all of these things together in collaboration, of course, with the whole production team. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of like hear a bit also from you, because we started the week together at Hakaniemen Ranta with the institutional day. And now it's already Friday. Time goes by so fast. I want to ask you, kind of like a lot of things stayed, but was there specifically something that stayed with you this week? What are you going to take with you to your summer things, Keme?
Like definitely there's so much. I don't know, you're saying that you took so many notes. How? Like I was like, my whole body was listening. I couldn't even write. I think I was writing during the first keynote, and then I just like surrender, like I can't. But yes, I have been a bit journaling about it, and I think that, for example, from yesterday's Ali Assad proposition that neutrality is never an absence, but something actively produced and performed, it really hit me like neutrality is a construct, it's a fact. You choose yourself to plug yourself in that construction, but there is no space outside reality. So it is not real. So I think that was connecting me through the whole week, because if neutrality is a choice, then everything else is a choice, like the care, the accountability. We cannot pretend anymore that we live outside reality. Arts doesn't operate on institutions outside reality. And then I know it sounds a bit funny, but I want a t-shirt from Sofia Bequesa's sentence of people not shaking their ass has never given anybody their human rights. It was funny, but it was so on point, because I was talking with a friend. It was like, this is a great example of how some people just stop at very symbolic gestures, and you just don't keep going with the trouble and with the questions. And how do you just avoid going with the uncomfortable? So yeah, but I don't know, there was like so many things. What about you, Monica?
Oh yeah, definitely seconding you, Keme, on everything that you said. One of the key things for me, or the key questions for me, is like, how do we actually work together? Like every year we kind of try to, with the artists, with the cultural workers, with everyone, we're trying to like build this actual like I think presence of like being together, or like convening, or like this togetherness. So this time the question for me was really like how to be together, how to like, for example, take accountability for the things that I am responsible, or I can, you know, somehow give. And that feels like a big thing, because usually we just come and we sit together, but we don't, like you said, Keme, like we don't really like yeah, we don't think of like, and then the light switches on, and then you're like, okay, yeah, neutrality. Like there is no such thing. Like everything that I do, like every breath that I take, there is energy, power, presence. There's all these things, and how to like tune into that. I was like, for example, with Argamaka's keynote, the movement, or the importance of like understanding this togetherness, or like being aware that everything, everyone, anything is connected. So like just for our very sake of existence, we need to be in community. We need to like see each other. We need to be with each other. So how to really be there. Yeah. But I also think that, you know, where we can see now, there's so many people who have had these, like here on this platform, these discussions, that there is a way of being together. People are coming up with different ideas of how to be together. So since there is a way, we just need the will. And that will we're like motivating in ourselves. So unbelievable creators, culture workers, amazing people just doing incredible things. So
yeah. Thank you. And as Monica said, we have had this year 56 guest speakers. So that is a huge amount of people. Urban Lapa is a tiny organization, and even though we are several collaborators, organizations co-producing it, the team is still quite small. So we've had a lot of practice, like concrete practice again, in how to work together throughout these previous last months. So again, people have very different kind of like needs, urgencies. People join the platform from different contexts. So really navigating and negotiating with concrete frictions as well. What does it mean when somebody's needs don't align with somebody else's needs, don't align with the small resources that we have, and then how do we still work together? How can we remain transparent and accountable? So we've had a big practice. I think every year is a practice, just making this platform, bringing this platform together. But then also this week has been really amazing. Personally, I'm just going to say that the first keynote of the week by Natasha A. Kelly was a really great contextualization. And then now this ending with kind of like Crypt Futurities, like made a beautiful arc. Natasha started by also asking, what does care mean? What is concrete care? So for example, how do we budget for care? How do we schedule for care? And then A was ending here with a dimension of crypt time, for example. So how do we schedule for that things might leak and go over time? And then how do we create bumper? We have about 5-ish minutes left. So what kind of next steps would we have? Tools, takeaways, next steps? Keme, shortly.
Okay. Always my first. Like like the whole week was like, it has this kind of behind threads connecting everything, right? It was so entangled, and I felt all the time like it was like a shake. Sometimes a bit more gentle, but it was like a shake to keep asking us questions, like especially all these things that we work with and we see in on everyday lives, like what is culture, what is quality, what is the framework, what is the lens, what is failure, success, what do we call a problem, what is not a problem. So all these things, like, keep asking that, because they are construct at the end. And then I keep returning, you mentioned Natasha, and this question of, for example, with quality, where who taught you what quality is? Where did you learn it from? Where? That is so strong. If you put it with everything, like, it can be quality, it can be the problem, it can be the care. So I don't know. And then with Samira's and Arla, like, coming back to emotions and affects. And also, I think that a bit with Sophia's, it was this idea of what it means to be a human. Like, we need to ask this at the bottom of everything, right? So I don't know. I guess, like, what I'm taking with me is just to keep engaging more and more with the practices of noticing and keep questions, not to get too comfortable. And then a bit getting, it is also practice, but getting a bit more comfortable with not knowing, with failing, on having doubts, because that is also, like, that is important. Like, it's asking me to move differently, or to notice where I'm moving towards or from. So yeah. What about you too?
Yeah, Monica,
I
what about you?
think mind is such a, like, it is a powerful tool. So like, I think maybe, okay, yeah, we didn't get an Excel or whatever, but we did get a lot to read. We got so much to think about. And I think this week has really offered us like new synapses. Like, we're firing now with new ideas, thoughts, and it has given us new kind of those kind of glasses, or like filters, to be like, okay, like adding to that, oh, I had this red lens on first, and then, oh, I got another lens and another lens, so that then that kind of the colorfulness opens up in new ways, because we start to see things through all these lenses, through all these filters. And I don't know, like, I just, the power of mind, knowledge is how much we can just, like, I don't know, as sponges, just like suck in. I really want people to rewatch things, because there's so much, like said, like taking so much notes and then just surrendering it to it, because you're like, oh, my brain is racing, and having this kind of telepathic discussion there with the speakers, but also like coming back, because always coming back gives you another thing and another thing. And hopefully next year we're gonna even elevate it more, like we're going forward and forward, and yeah.
What about you, Sonia?
So many things as well. That maybe, again, today, because we've been talking about intersectional futures, also the discussion that we had on Wednesday, we're talking about worldviews, coming back to also the conversations around eugenics and what kind of like futures are we taught to imagine. So then kind of like remembering that the futures can be different and they will be different, and how do we already practice that everyday imagination of what could good life look like if the futures would be intersectional, if everybody would have what they needed. We're again in the theater academy spaces in UniArts. What could these spaces look like if they would be really accessible, if like art that would be taught here would be from different knowledges and backgrounds? What would the spaces even look like? So I'm staying with these kind of like big questions. Friends, we are running out of time. We really need to wrap up, because we have one more workshop to move into in 15-ish minutes. So thank you so much, Geme. Thank you, Monica. This has been a really, really great year. I'm really proud of the platform. I think repetition is key. This is our 11th year. We are doing our best with small resources. but the program and each and every speaker has been really amazing and really important. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I will already put this feedback slide because we are sadly coming to the end of our webinar and to the end of Stop Hatred Now 2026. What's more, thank you, amazing guests. Thank you, partners, collaborators, sponsors, funders, and thank you, audiences, whoever listened, attended for even a moment. Thank you for taking the time and energy to educate yourself in these important topics. We could not do this without you. We could not do this without the help of all the amazing artists and experts that we had. And also, like, maybe a takeaway is that there's so much amazing knowledge in the world. Anytime, anywhere, anybody's like, oh, I don't know, like, please just Google. There's brilliant thinkers, even in Finland. We're a small country, but there's so much knowledge here. So that always amazes me each and every year. I will also want to thank the Urbanapa team. We've done loads of work, again, with this small team. So thank you, Lisa Kalkowski. Thank you, Milla Snoore. Thank you, Mikol Kuratolo. Thank you, Aurora Snoore. Thank you once more, Keme and Monica. Thank you, Tuukka Ervasti. So a lot of work, long hours, sweat, sometimes tears, a lot of laughter as well has gone behind this. And one more thing was
worth it. It's always worth
it. It's always worth it. And again, a reminder, all of the information will stay in stophatrednow.fi in the website. The videos will stay there. Please disseminate them, link them to your friend, to your colleague, rewatch them in your community, or just listen to them. So they're all there free of charge. And then last but not least, if you like Stop Hatred Now, if you want us to continue, please show it. Let us know where we have done well. Give us feedback. That is a very easy way to support us. Disseminate the information, share posts, or like Urbanapa's account in Instagram, or if you're not there, you can subscribe for our emailing list where you will know what are the next steps also in Stop Hatred Now. Please also hold the institutions you're collaborating with accountable, ask them to move on into concrete actions from beautiful speeches and strategies. And please also, of course, hold us accountable. Every year we're trying to do our best and we are learning and failing and trying again. If there's any institutions that want to collaborate us, support us, and be a part of this transition towards more equitable and diverse futures, please let us know, become a funder and sponsor, and help us do this better. And once more, let's keep the eyes on the prize. Let's keep our hearts on the prize. Let's keep our ears and emotions and work on the prize, which is a more inclusive, accessible, diverse, equitable, softer, funner, more pleasurable, socially and ecologically sustainable future and present. So that is the dream that we're working towards. So I'm Sonja Lindfors, and this was Stop Hatred Now 2026. Have a lovely, lovely evening. Have a lovely, lovely weekend, and we hope to hear and see from you. Take care.
Thank you.